Thank you. And if you want to tweet question, again, it's Robot RIC 2013, or if you will, Robot Rick 2013, or Robotrick 2013. While Renaud is wrapping up, Dan, let's start with the most urgent question. Projector quality in Sweden, what do you think? No, just kidding.
Not for Windows machines.
Yeah. Projector, AV humor. Well, let's start with a futurist question that you've had a chance to think about. And all three of you, I mean, Dan, we understood from your talk that stuff is happening in the industry, and there are lots of ideas around. And going forward, you had the Eric Schmidt quote about ubiquitous, abundant processing and sensor power and so on. What if we add, massively capable artificial intelligence to this? Where is this going? And the year 2054 was mentioned. I mean, what is your futurist thought on robotics?
Well, I try to stay away from being a futurist because actually, if you go back and look at futurist talks in the 80s and 90s and even early 2000s, it's just hysterical. But I mean, in some way, in the best ones, when they take an early example of technology now and try to extend it. But in terms of the artificial intelligence, AI got a bad rap back in the 80s. They tried to push it in a number of different directions. There was no market for it. Then Brooks comes out later in the 80s with a subsumption architecture in terms of robotics and just shows that you can do a lot of things with very little intelligence, like an ant. But over time, other things have changed, and AI has become pervasive in a lot of things that we're doing in terms of using your charge card, and if you charge up too much liquor, you'll get a phone call, or if you go to another country and try to use your thing. So this whole notion of trying to build models based on rules, some sort of rules-based models where you could forward chain and backward chain and make decisions, that kind of went away. And there's been more of a limited scope, and that limited scope has worked. Where I see things happening now is what's going on with the web. Because at one time, to get all of that information, you would either need to develop some type of model. But that model exists now. So for example, if I was to show you a picture of a certain building, there's applications on the web where that would tell you pretty much where that building was. Or applications on the web that you could show it a face and or piece of music, and it would tell you what that piece of music was. It can also talk back to you and speak to you and understand you and translate your language. So in some sense, that model's being built, but it's being built in, I wouldn't say a random way, but I would say not in, it's not using de facto standards, any kind of, I mean, de jure standards, or any type of rigorous formalism. It's occurring naturally. And I think there are ways that you'll be able to access that and bring that into machines that actually actuate and work in the real world. And that's where I see artificial intelligence playing now. So in terms of autonomy, in terms of learning and decision making, that will be the impact.
You said something interesting there, and to bring Erin and Dan into, or Renaud into the conversation, you said that what became the killer app didn't actually require as much power as we thought. And it reminds me of, a lot of people mention the iPhone as the killer app of the mobile phone generation, but to quote the engineers of Nokia, it's a shit phone. I mean, it's technologically not particularly remarkable, most of the stuff. It sort of gathered things that had been around in the world for the past 10 years. Will we see something happening here? How many people are engineers in the room, by the way? Yes, this is my anti-engineer talk. Engineers, this is going on, AI, we've got all this capability, but the actual killer app, the disruptive innovation, if you will, is something that is not particularly impressive technologically. What are your thoughts?
So I have a story about my opinion of artificial intelligence. I figured I would be a better entrepreneur and a better roboticist if I went through my career assuming it will never happen and never exist. And it depends on your question of what is artificial intelligence. If it's recreating life, well, when I was a senior in college, funny story, I skipped my Thursday evening class at Northeastern to go across the river to MIT CSAIL and to listen to a talk from Ray Kurzweil. And the entire talk migrated into a debate of whether or not a monkey had a brain. They're talking about the Turing test. It was an anniversary for Alan Turing. And I asked the question, like, if you cannot perceive or answer the question, does a monkey have a brain? Can a robot ever truly be intelligent? It's like, you know what, screw it. Like, I'm just going to assume it's never going to happen. And as I resided in a computer science lab for 2 years and learned that every AI class the students were taking were just the problems that were not yet solved. Something would be called AI, then people figured it out and worked on it. It was no longer called AI, and it always moved on to the next thing. To me, AI, what's intelligent, what matters is data. How do you develop pools of data, and how do you draw from pools of data? That's what intelligence is. Google collected data. I heard a story that Amazon started because there was a pool of data that it could access in order to bring in books into their website. And so when I think of 3D objects and perhaps perception, how do you recognize objects? Well, how are you going to have people import 3D objects into a database, and who's going to pay for that? How long is it going to take, and how are they incentivized? So I wrote an article in IEEE about a year ago about, well, if once online shopping adopts 3D models of objects, you have your 3D object and all your tags about how it's described, let's make sure that this is in a file format that robots can then use to search objects and reference the 3D structure, and maybe we could have humanoid robots picking things in a house someday. But it's not AI, it's data and algorithms and data mining. It's about information.
I think somebody once said that it's not real autonomy until the robot, instead of doing what you want it to, runs off to the beach or goes away and smokes pot or something. Then we have true autonomy. Your thoughts, Renaud, on this realm of investing in the new and artificial intelligence? What is disruptive? Does it have to be technologically advanced to be disruptive?
No, not at all. I'll take the example of the monkey. There was a study recently published, I think it was this week or last week, by the UK on the stock market. They realized that a monkey can perform better than any professional stock market for the past 20 years, I think. In average, professional stock market people, they can bring like maybe 5,000 euro of profit, when a monkey, just by throwing some dart, can bring 5,400 euros. So the monkey is beating the professional. So it's not a question of technology. It's not a question of how much intelligence you bring in the thing. I think it's the right proportion of technology, the right proportion of intelligence. And once again, to address a use, to address one need. Once the Roomba, it's not very intelligent. It was very intelligent when Rodney Brooks designed it at MIT when he was working on the first mobile platforms. But today, it's just a matter of penetration of the technology within the markets, meaning that with what the level of intelligence we have today available, is it enough to build a good product? I think so. It depends on how you define a good product. That's it. So the level of technology, it really depends on the application. Once again, you won't use the same system to clean your house than to inspect a nuclear plant. So that's just a matter of what's the use. And based on talking about the artificial intelligence, we need a lot of research to be done on that. Clearly, it's a field where cognitive systems, cognitive collaboration between different systems, should it be UAVs or UJVs, and that's clearly a challenge. So we need to still work on that. And then the question of bringing this intelligence, bringing this research to the market, that's another step, and that's not only about technology. That's part of it.
And as somebody said, with artificial intelligence, that's one thing, data processing, understanding what to do with it, but artificial unintelligence, misunderstanding, making new connections, creativity, and that's probably also a realm that needs to be, can we have artificial creativity, artificial imagination? And that's truly an interesting question. We've had one audience question, and if anybody wants to ask a second one, we could put your hands up. So I'll actually favor the brave gentleman in the front who put his hand up, and then we'll go to the Twitter question.
So I think that you asked how many were engineers. I'd like to ask how many consider themselves an end user of robotics. So you're going to use them, you're going to use them. Maybe you're from a hospital organization or a company. So I'd like to ask you that. How do you, Erin mentioned interact with the customer early, and you talked about the serendipity, and you showed us an enormous amount of examples. I think the common thread was that they all had great interactions with their potential customer. But how do we do that? How do we invite this end user? How do we get the hospital administrator? How do we get the firefighter? How do we get these end users into this early? How do we invite them? How do we not scare them away by talking about artificial intelligence?
It's a lovely question. Thank you.
I have a clear and straightforward answer. I take their money. Straightly put it. Meaning that in our fund, part of the investors are coming from the industry through their corporate fund. Why? It's not because they have so much money that they are able to spend it, but it's because they realize that their entire business model through robotics is evolving. But they don't know how to address that because they don't have the structure to innovate. It's big companies in energy market, in automotive markets. It's big, heavy people. And they have to go for the margin. They need to pay their engineers. They need to pay their staff. And they don't have much money to invest in innovation and somehow try to find new opportunities. That's where we come in and we say, okay, let's externalize your R&D to us, and let's leverage with other people to make sure that you have information, that you will have opportunity to test new products. You come to us because you are part of our investors. You explain us your challenge, your industry. You are the expert of your sector. We can identify people and try to bring you solution. And if the startup we invest in can offer a commercial solution to you, well, please be my guest on two things. First, you can validate the proof of concept of those guys. That's what you're saying, Erin. Take 3 months instead of 3 years to make sure that the startup is going in the right direction and not the wrong direction. And secondly, once the prototype is there, you can test it and you can validate it on the different phases of development. So that's how we bring people. And it's impressive to look at those traditional and I would say conservative industrial executives. They are very into it and they are very willing to participate and to share their expertise.
I'll do that. I just call them. So, and I was scared of sales. I never really thought of myself as a salesperson, and some people said sales is just a transfer of enthusiasm. But when I say, like, I worked on Roombas and I worked on a lot of smaller robots and even educational robots, and when you're doing larger robots that do something meaningful, I go online and read as much as I can. This is like the first filter is you have a hypothesis of where this can go, and read as much as possible about any tangential market. Follow the rabbit trails. If you could spend a couple of weeks just reading up as much as possible, do that, and then take your best guess on like 3 or 5 different segments. And I just get them on the phone and cold call them. And I was surprised how happy they were to invite me into their facility and give me a tour. And these were the words I used, like, I have a new technology that I think you might be interested in. I sent them an email with a video or a quick little write-up. And this is just an open-ended conversation. I'm not trying to sell you anything, but I'm wondering if this could be useful to you. And that has worked really well. And this has basically been my job for the past 6 months. I've been cold calling potential customers and making some headway. Because these people, if it's a hot day and somebody sells you a fan, you want them to sell them that fan. The same thing, like go figure out what the problems are, make your best hypotheses on best fits and best guesses and go from there. And they want to hear from you. And it's, if anyone here has done purchasing, like engineering, like finally was a member of the team that found the exact right component and everyone loved you. Has anyone been in that situation? It's like, oh, look, I found this other motor that we needed and instead of this motor, and now our project works better. Well, that's their job. It's their job to find pieces of equipment and automation and components and solutions. And so when you call them up and say, hey, do you want this? Then they get a little camaraderie within their team, a little bit of a gold star that they're the ones to help solve this company's problem. And I, as a company or as a salesperson, want to help them feel like that they are recognized as well within their organization. That helps penetrate the different levels of organization up to different decision makers. But I just get them on the phone.
I would say one more thing, and it's difficult to talk about because you could talk anything from ranging from smart toy up to a military unmanned aerial vehicle. But if we leave it mostly at industrial manufacturing, you can actually ask them, and there's a couple ways you can ask them. You can get them on the phone, or there are plenty of people who have done surveys and collected more data rigorously. And what you've seen recently over the last 2 years particularly is an emphasis, particularly in manufacturing, of less on cost cutting and increasing quality, which is always the driver for industrial robotics in the past. It just has been. Now the new emphasis now as the recession recedes is to how can I use this strategically to actually grow my business as opposed to just save money and produce products of higher quality. So now the emphasis, typically in big organizations, is how can I use this new technology strategically to actually grow my business? And it's a very different question. And so that changeover has occurred over the last couple of years. And it's quite distinct now, and it comes from multiple sources across the world.
Thank you.
We've had a question on Twitter from Anna Linnea echoing a sentiment about robots that I see and hear quite a lot these days. What will happen to human labor? You know, the Luddite talking point of potential 50% unemployment versus a completely reinvented world where humans and robots work together. I mean, what are your thoughts on the matter?
Well, I mean, this has generated a lot of press recently. But the way I look at it is very fundamental. The change is going to occur for whatever reason, to be more strategic, to cut costs, improve quality, or whatever. So certain classes of jobs are going to be eliminated. So that argument almost goes away. Like, what do you do? So what do you do with the people who are going to be displaced? And I hate using that word displaced because as we were talking yesterday, displacement to analysts is someone's mortgage or their job or their children's education or whatever. So it is a real challenge. But that's just going to occur. So either we can try to retrain them, but there's still going to be displacement, or maybe society just changes and instead of 40 hours per week, you work 30 hours per week and you move on to more different types of things. But it's a very, you know, there's the long-term view and then there's the immediate short-term view. And it's with the short-term view for certain classes of workers that brings me anguish, and I imagine most people here.
I have no good way to answer this question. I'll just admit that. My hope is being on the forefront of pushing some robots into some industrial applications that people have wanted fulfilled for decades, but only until now could actually have them done. The progress for robots to do any type of meaningful work, it's going to take a long, long time. And for it to see any significant amount of displacement from robots, it's going to take a long time. So I'm hopeful that the education systems and also the independent educational games, now that so many kids have iPads and smartphones and computers, that the next generation of kids are going to be better educated and understand that there's much more value in life than moving one object from point A to point B. And from the other economic scale, if you take an organization, what we'd rather have, a job, a minimum wage job, moving something from point A to point B, or have that company have a successful stock price and be successful as an organization, so I have a retirement fund that's doing well. Because no company in their right mind is going to choose more expensive alternatives to benefit labor when they could automate and then remain a competitive company and stay in business. So if that's the choice, it's always more important to stay in business. And automation will help that, but it's a long road. The replacement's not going to happen all that quickly, and nothing's going to replace art and marketing and sales and design and ideas. That's what people are best at. That's what people should be used for, and that's more interesting.
Renaud, I sort of know your opinion. We can replace investment banks with monkeys, so we already know that it's happening. But
somehow it's already the case.
Given that you're from France.
Coming from these industries.
Yeah. Given that you're from France, that last time I checked had pretty interesting labor laws. What's the discussion like there in terms of robotics replacing all kinds of workers?
It's a highly political but crucial question. We've been involved with the Federation, Cyrobo. We've been involved in the recent initiative on robotics for France. It's something coming from the Ministry of Industry, Ministry of Defense, and Ministry of Research. It's a joint initiative to invest in robotics in France. And the first question I had from the Ministry of Industry was to say, give me the argument when people and labor will ask me, you will kill job with robots. And my answer was just very honest. I would say, putting a robot in every SME in France, okay? How worse can it be than having the Chinese taking the production lines? No, so first, that's the first thing. At least we keep the production and some part of the jobs within the country. That's the first thing. And then if you look at the history of industrial robotics, recent surveys show that for the 1+ million of machines installed so far in the industry, more than 3 million jobs were created. It's not an equal number. You added jobs on top of that. So I totally agree. It will take time. There will be a transition. But do we have the choice today? We are looking for growth in Europe. Every country is fighting to reshore the production, to find new solutions so that it's not going to emerging countries. Robotics can be one of it. So clearly, it will take some training, it will take some education, it will take some people to spend time in education, but that's the future. And clearly, yeah, that's the next trend. So yes, from a very short-term perspective, we may have the feeling that it's a job killer. But even in France, and as you mentioned, French laborers are very, present on that kind of subjects. They begin the CGT, like the heaviest, the very, very, very left-wing union. They're realizing that it's a game changer, and they have no choice. Otherwise, it's going to be worse and worse. And, it's being accepted, I think. But it's political.
Do we have one more question from the audience? A second one? We had one on Twitter, so I'll get... Okay. Sir.
Hello, my name is Leif Ahlman. I work for Drones Networking. I asked last year about robots, military and sex industry. What the military has driven the internet and so on, even the sex industry. But another limitation I see today is the batteries, the power source. And it's not much talk about that, but it's, if you're going to have personal care robot, it shouldn't be on charge when you really need it. Do you see any evolution in the power source, not only batteries, but other power sources?
Absolutely. I actually put that under autonomy, under the area. You usually think that autonomy is decision making, typically with navigation, but power autonomy is extremely important. So of course there's going to be typical evolution in the battery power. They'll get more effective batteries, they'll have to have charges longer, they'll be smaller, they'll be powerful, maybe even more cheaper. But other people are looking at ways where, particularly robots in structured settings, like this building, for example, the doors are a certain width, and it's mandated in hospitals and other types of buildings that you have charging outlets every 15 feet or 20 feet or whatever. So now efforts are on in terms of research, so these robots can in fact go in and plug themselves in traditional, typical outlets as opposed to trying to look for something else. And then the other way that they're doing it is just smarter software so these things can go back and charge on their own. But that is a problem that keeps occurring and reoccurring time after time after time, particularly in the areas like field robotics where we really need like a gas engine because it's the matter of power. You generate that amount of torque, the battery just can't simply handle it. So ongoing research with just batteries, smart software with respect to how they do the charging, and then smart software and hardware to take advantage of standard charging technologies that's available all around us. And those are areas that I see moving forward with respect to the power autonomy problem.
It really depends on the application. So I wrote the product spec for the Adept Lynx. It's a mobile robot. The previous robots from Mobile Robots were using lead-acid batteries. But the Adept Lynx needed to be used in semiconductor and hospitals, so we're worried about off-gassing, worried about having some nurse change out the battery, is it heavy or not? And all of them requested that it work an 8-hour workday. So inside the Adept Lynx is some lithium-ion batteries that have a 14-hour runtime, about 6 to 1, 5 to 1 charge. So 14 hours, seeing 2 or 3 hours on the dock. And the payload is going to draw some power from that and bring that down. But we did, for the one application that definitely required an 8-hour runtime, and it was a low power draw from the payload, the platform could survive that 8 hours and then go back and auto dock. And it can always, when you mitigate auto charge and optimize charging routines, you don't exactly want to sell them an additional robot because of this, but it's a great way to sneak it in. So in order to have 2 or 3 robots running 24/7, you need to buy 4 robots. And depend on their system and how they want to optimize things. They may not want to buy 4 robots and just decide that there's a certain time of day that they can live with only 2 instead of 3 robots to figure out the power routine. But the batteries are getting better. There's a lot of tangential markets that want batteries to improve, and we can borrow off of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I share your views. It's a real issue. I mean, power to make it work. And new research is going on, so it's fine, it's good news, but also the energy management, how you shut down the system or part of it. How do you manage this? If you compare that to e-paper, e-paper is an old technology, but it's not really used. Like if you go to a building, all the building managers, when they have to share information between the different people living in a building, they just put papers on the wall. It's not convenient. If you have a solution of e-paper that could last for 2 years without any kind of source of energy, and you just need to upload at a very specific given time, you change the page through a Wi-Fi network and you upload the information, it's working fine. It's no energy consumption. It's just a matter of, managing the flow. So I think robotics, based on more research in batteries and more advanced systems based on real energy management procedures, and once again, based on the right level of technology to perform the right task, making sure that your processors and your algorithm do not lose computing power to do something that is useless to perform the given action at the right time, then that's energy management, then you can optimize that. But clearly, in the end, as a backbone, we need better system, and that's an issue, specifically with drones, clearly.
When we are exploring these ideas and looking at what's going on and thinking about starting some kind of company, talking to end users, going to see you at RoboCapital or the fellow investor in the audience, patent. Should we document, with the risk of somebody else stealing our documented ideas, protecting them like we used to? Or should we go this modern way? I was asked by Thomas on Twitter, should we protect ideas? How?
Of course, it's better to protect ideas. I mean,
through a patent?
It depends. If you look at Intuitive Surgical, that's what they chose to do, and they have lots of patents, and they have such a portfolio today of patents on their system that it's somehow impossible for a newcomer to get into the market. There were several attempts in Italy or in Europe to bring new, low-cost, more efficient products on the market, but Intuitive Surgical said, hey, I get a patent on that. That's total bullshit. But by the time that the trial is performed and that the time it will take to finance this trial for the new startup, European startup, even if Intuitive Surgical is wrong, then the startup will disappear out of cash. So clearly that's a strong weapon.
But would you finance a company that had an interesting product service but no patent?
Yes, I mean, when you deal with integration products, you don't really patent, or there is no real IP on the product itself, because it's bringing the energy source from somewhere, it's bringing the software, the operating system from somewhere else. It doesn't own any IP on these components, but it owns a savoir-faire, a know-how on the integrated product. And then, even if you don't have the IP on that, you bring it to the market. And that's one way to defend your positioning, is to make sure that you identify the right product for the right application, and you are the first one to go. You build a brand. You don't need IP, you don't need patent, you just work on the brand, and you'll be the first one to communicate on this brand, to market this brand, and you'll have maybe a 1 year, a 2 year advance to your competitors. So in the end, people will copy you, will copy your systems, but at least you'll be recognized as a brand to do that, and it's inexpensive. It's just a matter of investing in marketing, and that's a very strong power. So yes, I could invest in a company only doing integration, building a brand, and going first and aggressively to the market. And then you need to reinvent yourself and so on and so forth. So that's, that's the real issue of, it's better if you can have IP, if you can finance your IP. We all know it's very costly. It's sometimes very long. It's difficult. It's a pain. It's better, but it's not the only opportunity, and there are everything that you could use to do that, clearly.
Dan and Erin, your thoughts?
Well, it's not necessary, you say, but when you go in and speak to investors, they'll usually, there's a list of things they look for in the top management team. Is it disruptive? Is it the correct market? Do they have money? But always somewhere in that list is protected IP. Now, if you don't have it, you can get around it for sure by being first to marketplace and exploiting it other ways, but it never really works against you. It's not, so someone say, oh, you have all these patents, sorry. So protected IP is always one of those things on that top 10 list where people look for, particularly in certain markets like medical devices, healthcare, robotics, and other things that touch on those areas. Consumer stuff is less important, I think. And then if it is consumer, it plays a lesser role, particularly with certain parts of Asia, I should say, who don't play by the same rules that everybody else does.
Erin, this is your chance to be the Californian Burning Man contrarian. To pee or not to pee, as in patents.
So I have a couple of different comments. First of all, if anyone's paying attention to the US patent system, it changed a couple of weeks or a couple of months ago to be from now it's first to file instead of first to invent. So it used to be you could even mail yourself a letter, a little sketch, or have your signature in a notebook, and you could use this as evidence that proof you were the first to invent. If a competitor ended up went and filed a patent and you disagreed with it, you can take that to court. My company got patents in the day before it changed. It was like, all right, we got it in before the entire patent office changed, or a few more. It was a little bit of a crunch. That changes the game, because what people used to say was patents are important. In my personal opinion, patents are important. If you can afford to patent everything, do it. It's one of the reasons why Amazon ended up buying Kiva systems instead of just recreating it themselves. They were very, from what I've heard from mixed talks, he spent so much time on patenting everything early, and he talked about writing most of the patent himself, and he paid a lawyer like anywhere between $2,000 and $6,000. He tried to do it on the cheap as much as possible. They also tried to patent everything as much as possible. But I think using the fear of having unpatented technology and having that prevent you from talking to customers is also bad. I think it's good to just talk to customers and talk to people early on, because there'll be many new opportunities to patent new ideas as you talk to customers. So take your core idea, maybe it's patented, maybe it's not, your core technology, talk to as many people as possible. And once you hear the word yes over and over again from different customers, like, yes, I'll buy that, yes, I'll buy that, yes, I'll buy that, there are many opportunities to patent specific details of your core technology in partnership or alongside with the market you're entering or the context it's used in, that you'll have a whole breadth of new patent opportunities I never would have thought of initially, because you talk to customers. And so there's a point to keep it open, talk to people, and then there's a point to lock it down and patent everything. And maybe that process just needs to be sped up because of the first file change in the US. So patents are good, but they're expensive, so trade-offs.
And on that note, we're out of time. This was a fascinating talk. Will your talks be available online, and especially looking at you, Dan? Can
yes,
you make them available through? Yes. I'm sorry the autonomous thinking projector had other errands to run today. This has been a fascinating discussion. You will be here for the rest of the day, I'm told, for people to interact, talk with you, connect, ask questions, beg for money, whatever it might be. And I suggest we thank you with a round of hands. We've gotten gifts here generously from Gens, Scandinavian craftsman company, 150 years old, stainless steel, 150 years ago, they were worried that these shakers would also steal jobs. So a round of applause for the lovely panel of speakers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And we go to a coffee break, but it's quick because you're needed downstairs, where in 20 minutes the world-famous innovation catwalk will begin. I'll see you there. Thank you.